This is the Honest Playbook. I'm Jason, here with Jose. And today on this episode, we're talking about money mistakes that we made in our 20s and what that actually cost us.
We don't know it all, but here's what we do know.
We don't know it all, but really what we want to do with this podcast is talk about what we do know, and that just comes from experience. And so really today's episode is talking about the mistakes that we made. And we're going to start with Jose's story and some of the things that he did in his 20s. So I've known Jose since high school, and he was my first friend that ever bought a home. And so that was a big deal. And so he was making some really good decisions, but I know he didn't always make good decisions. And so we'll talk a little bit more about some of the success that he had. But really, Jose, like I've always seen you as the friend who has done well for himself, but that's from the outside looking in. And you know some of the hardships that you went through and some of what that cost you, some of the setbacks that you endured. So we'll start with your story and just, man, tell us about finances in your 20s. And hopefully there's some people who are listening that will hear your story and maybe not make some of those same mistakes.
Sure. I don't know about being successful, but I appreciate the compliment there. But yes, definitely, it's always easier to kind of look into someone, what they're doing now, and see what they have. But yes, I've probably made 10 mistakes for every one right decision that I've had in my life. So, man, going back to my 20s, I mean, being in my 40s now and sitting here and looking back, what I did. I will say I probably did this, I made the mistake everybody does is, you want to live beyond your means. So I'll kind of give you some perspective since you already started talking about the house piece. Yeah, I bought my first home when I was 23. At that time, yeah, it was a big deal for me. I mean, you got to realize I grew up in a Hispanic home. My parents, I think my dad didn't buy his first house till like 99, 98. We moved into the house, Jason, that you've been to many times with my mom, that she currently still lives in. You've been there, and we moved into the house in 96.
How old were your parents back then? Like, I don't have any frame of reference for how old they were when we were in high school.
They were like in their mid 30s.
Okay.
They were under 40.
So your older. Dad didn't buy his first house until he was in his mid 30s, but you were in your early 20s. So that's the perspective piece there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So, for me, we lived in apartments growing up. We rented homes. So we moved a lot. I grew up on the same side of town that my parents live in now. And yeah, so buying a home was one of those things. And I'll tell you this, it looks great. And, the way you paint it sounds great. But I'll give you some context there. Maybe you don't even know this, right? So the context here, one day I was out trying to have a good time. I was 20, probably 22 at the time, and still living at home. I had dropped out of U of H. So I started going to U of H, and as you know, we both went there, and I dropped out because I struggled. And so I went to, I was going to U of H and I struggled there, and then I failed a couple classes. I'll be honest, I didn't even know that you could drop a class, and so I just ended up failing most of those classes, right? And so I failed the class, and I got put on academic probation. And I went over to U of H downtown, and I did good at the U of H downtown, and then stubborn and ego was like, okay, I can go back to U of H main campus. And so I transferred back the next semester, and yeah, kicked my ass again, right? I think and it wasn't that I couldn't do it. I just wasn't in the mental place to do it. And so I dropped out, and didn't really have a game plan. I was working. I was making okay money, and just kind of started focusing on those kind of things. And so what ended up happening was one time I was out and I came home late, and my dad bitched at me. My dad bitched at me and was like, hey, you can't be coming home at this time. And so me and him got into a big argument. And I was like, man, fuck this. I'm out. And the next day I started, I'll be honest, like I might as well be honest. I remember I was crying that day. I was just so angry and really bothered by it. Because when you're 22, you feel grown. But in reality, if I look back now, I was just a scared child, even if I didn't want to admit it at the time. And so, I'm a grown ass man crying in my mind, right? Crying because
Yeah. Yeah.
dad just bitched at me for coming home late. And
Yeah.
so I ended up just saying, I'm gonna start looking for an apartment. I did. I started looking for an apartment, and the girl I was dating at the time, which ended up being my wife for a while. We recently, we got divorced a while back, but at the time we went looking for apartments, and she was kind of supportive and looking with me. And one day I was talking to my mom about things, and I was like, hey, I found an apartment, and I'm considering moving into this apartment because I just really wanted to start feeling independent. And I don't know, in Hispanic homes, you live under my roof, you follow my rules, and so
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
that's the way it is. So I said, well, fuck it, I'll get me a new roof. Oh my God, so I'm going to go buy my own roof, right? And so my mom was like, why don't you go look for a house? Why are you trying to get an apartment? And the house thing just never really crossed my mind. And I think that was just the upbringing. My family, like I said, didn't buy a home till their mid-30s. And so, I went into this neighborhood. I mean, I really didn't even shop at the time. I went into like the first neighborhood. And this is right before the housing bubble. You remember the 2008 housing bubble that happened?
Yeah.
Well, this was 2000, almost 2005. And I went into the neighborhood. I walked into this neighborhood, walked into the office and said, I want to buy a house. And they were like, okay, all right, cool. And they start, they do the salesman thing. They show it to you, blah, blah, blah. I literally walked out of there, signed paperwork, and they started building a house from scratch.
Wow. It was a different time, bro.
It was yes. I've bought many homes since then. And yes, I make a lot more money now, have better credit, and I have a harder time buying a house now than I did in 2005.
Yeah.
So it was ridiculous. But I walked in there, long story short, right? We won't drag this too long, but long story short, a few months went by. They built it from scratch. I signed on the paperwork, and I remember I even got a check back. I didn't put any money down, nothing, and the house is in my name. But it's not all peaches and cream because shitty as interest rate. I got locked in with I think it was like a dual mortgage, right? So it was like a primary mortgage and a secondary mortgage with a balloon payment with a variable interest rate. So it was.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It was a pretty shitty deal. So when you paint this picture of like, hey man, my friend here has bought his first home. I was like, yeah, but with some painful scars to go with it. But I don't know. I mean, it's not all. What you see from one side is not always what you see from my end, right?
Yeah, for sure. So would you consider, like, do you feel like that was a good financial decision for you at the moment? Or do you feel like that was a silly financial movement for you at that time?
Sure. No, I think that's both, right? It was a painful lesson. But I think a lot of people got tricked into that, which is why we had the 2008 crash in the housing market.
Right.
Because they were handing homes to people who did not. Yeah, exactly. But look, the way I took, shitty mortgage rates, bad deal on my end. From that perspective, I knew that was a mistake. I should have never got into that. But what ended up happening is I persevered through it for 5 years. So for 5 years, I paid those higher payments. The variable rate started going up, and I managed to make it work. And this is 5 years of I was pretty much essentially house broke, right? And there was times, I think there was times where I was my weekends were mowing the grass, watering the grass, living in this house because that house was taking up so much of my income. And I will say at the time, my live-in girlfriend, she was there and she was helping. And so even between us two, we were still struggling. But I think we were making the mistake most people do is you're living beyond your means. I was already house broke.
Right.
So even with dual income, we were struggling. I remember, at times charging my light bill to a credit card. I mean,
that was going to be one of the questions that I asked you. Like, so your house broke, but you're living beyond your means. So what did that cost you? Well, then it cost you essentially some debt at some point in time, some credit card debt. Yeah. Yeah.
No. I think I was probably 40, 50 grand in the hole at one point.
Wow. Yeah. So that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And that, if we're talking about some of the money mistakes, it's like maybe it wasn't so much of a mistake getting the house and you didn't realize what it was. The mistake you made was not realizing what it was actually going to cost you down the line. I think that's the actual mistake.
Yeah, you hit that right on. It's the people think you buy the house, it's the mortgage payment. No, it's the mortgage, it's the taxes, it's the insurance, it's the maintenance, the upkeep, the furnishings, the what do you want to do to this house, or how do you personalize it?
Yeah.
It's all of it.
Yeah.
It's everything. And most people don't stop and think about, those components. And, and even now, I mean, to this day, sometimes, like, you sit here and as I've grown, you still forget to include some of those things. And back then I didn't even know. Right. And, how bad my deal was when I got the house, I was paying a
You
lot.
had no clue.
Yeah, I had no clue. I was paying a lot. And then at the end of the year, I was always paying taxes separate. So my taxes weren't even escrowed. My taxes
Oh
and
my
insurance
God.
exactly.
That's
My
so
tax.
brutal.
Yeah.
And
My taxes.
back in the day, we didn't have access to YouTube to be able to go listen to a podcast that talks about buying your first home and 10 mistakes not to make as a first time home buyer in your 20s. Like, that didn't exist. I want to hit on something real quick.
Sure.
So you said you were housebroke. And for a lot of people, they'd probably say, well, I'd rather have a house than be broke than not have a house and be broke. And I just think talk to me a little bit about the idea of choosing your kind of broke, because people will spend money on the things that they want and they'll go into debt on the things that they want, which is part of my story. So, we'll talk about that later. But what do you think about that idea of just like some people just have to choose their broke?
Yeah. There is better brokes than others. That's not even the right way to say it.
It's a funny thing to think about.
Right?
Yeah.
No, being a house broke isn't the worst thing in the world. But I mean, it still costs me things. I think when you're going out to dinner broke, or when you're, going to concerts or nightclubs, or, in our case, woman broke. That's a different kind of broke, right? You don't get anything. The only thing I can say, I was house broke, but there was with an asset that eventually appreciated, right? And that's a difference. And I think most financial podcasts that you listen to, and for the record here, we're not giving, we're not financial experts here. We're just kind of telling our story. So, take this with a grain of salt and put this to your experience. I was in an asset broke, right? And so a home, even with the shitty deal, was still an asset at the end of the day. And so,
Right.
And I will say, you can look at me and give me more credit than it was. It wasn't something that, when I bought it was like, hey, I'm responsible. Look at me. I'm buying a financial asset. No, I was pissed at my dad. It had nothing to do with being, but fortunately for me, a little luck and a little ignorance played into this. And so, I chose my broke for the wrong reasons. But fortunately for me, it was into something that, even though I stuck it out and it was shitty for the first 5 years, it wasn't something that didn't give me something in return. Yeah.
So what were you telling yourself during that time? Like, how did you, so the story was, I don't want to be under my dad's roof anymore, so I'm going to buy my own roof. Like, was there more to that drove that purchase? You kind of talked about it being an ego purchase a little bit, like maybe hammer down some more on that.
It was, I mean, honestly, it wasn't even a great decision. It wasn't something that I thought through. It was more of, hey, you know what? I wanted to move out. And that was the primary goal for me, was to get out and to, show my father I can be a man. I can be responsible. I can take care of me. I didn't need him, which, we can get into that more, but this is about money today. But,
right.
With my mom, when my mom kind of said, hey, why don't you go look into buying a home? Why are you? And my mom was at least financially savvy enough to say, buying a home is not a bad thing. I know now you'll hear podcasts or YouTube videos that'll say, don't buy the home, don't buy the home. But I think things from 2005 to 2026 have changed. But back then, buying an asset was what they, everybody says the American dream.
American dream.
And so for me, it really was ego, but then also understanding that was something that was mine, right? I wasn't renting. So I was at least smart enough to say, hey, you know what? You're right. I shouldn't look into an apartment. And my mom told me probably the best advice now when I look back, her best advice was, what's the worst they're going to say is no, to go look into the house. And those words is what made me say, well, you're right. She's like, you'll go, they'll say no, they'll tell you why, and then you can figure out how to fix that. And well, fortunately for me, they didn't say no.
Right.
They didn't say no. They didn't tell me all the details, and I didn't bother to read the fine print, but they didn't say no. So, they opened the door and I walked in, thinking I was the man at the time.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty wild. So was there anything else that happened during that time? So like you were house broke, but obviously to live today, there are so many expenses and so many things that you have to have or we think we need in order to make it. So you had vehicles, you had stuff in the house, there was entertainment and different things like that. Was there other ways that you were spending your money that you would consider, looking back now, it was foolish?
I think we went out a lot to eat.
Sure.
And probably drank too much. Yeah, that's the honest truth. I think we spent money on food and drinks,
Sure.
going out, entertainment. But I will say, we didn't really go out a lot. We worked.
Mm-hmm.
We worked, and this is pre-COVID, and so we went to an office. You spent your money on gas and clothing and all that good stuff, and I mean, I'll be honest, I think we were so broke, man. There was no money to go out. I mean, I remember one time, this is probably irrelevant to the conversation, but I'll tell you how broke we were, right? I remember one time having a shitty day at work and driving home, and I saw a billboard for a new restaurant, brand new restaurant. It was a fancy restaurant that had just opened up in the Clear Lake area, which wasn't far from where we lived. And so having a bad day, pick up the phone. I'll call the ex there, and I was like, "Hey, we're gonna go to dinner. Get dressed." And it was just like that, right? And I'll hit it real fast. But we went to dinner, so forth. Never been there, fancy place, because I was feeling down, right? I was feeling down, and I emotionally needed something. And I remember looking around, and everybody was buying this steak, and so I was like, and the waiter comes and he shows us this raw steak on a plate, says today's special. I looked around, see everybody has it. And me, I'm like, well, hell, I should get one too. Everybody's got one. It can't be that bad. He brings the steak. At the time, that was the best steak I've ever had. It was so delicious. And, but then later the check comes and I look and I was like, man, how do we get to $200? I was like, it's just the two of us. And, and then I looked and I remember looking at the check and then looking up. And telling her, that steak was $100. And she looked at me and she's like, well, at least it was good. I was like, what? It was delicious, but I promise you that stung.
Yeah.
That stung. I mean,
yeah, you felt that one.
Oh yeah. That definitely, back then, man, that $100 was a knife to the heart.
Sure.
It was I felt like, man, I lost so much. And I remember getting up and having buyer's remorse at the moment. I don't even know how you can have buyer's remorse for something.
Yeah.
Wallet
Oh my gosh.
But I mean, there was no bringing that back. There was no returning it.
You can
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, go ahead.
I do want to hit a little bit on the idea of what you thought back then and what you know now, but I'm going to toss that to you after I think about that a little bit with you. So you mentioned being broke.
Yeah.
And like I said, from the outside looking in, it's like you invited me over to your house. I'm like, man, Jose's got this house and we're playing not Call of Duty, what was it? Quake?
Halo
on your land, on your LAN, your local area network inside of your home, right? So I'm like, we're there, we're playing games. You got people over, you got extra rooms, we're sleeping on the floor and the couch and stuff, and we had a good time. But me showing up, I'm like, oh man, Jose's really got it going on. And you're telling me man, we were so broke, and the picture I have in my head and the words coming out of your mouth don't mesh. Right? Because what I thought was Jose's got his shit together. Jose's successful. Jose's got money. And what I actually know now is that you had your financial struggles just like everybody else.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lesson there. Help me kind of pull out the lesson for people that are listening to this episode right now about that
Sure.
idea?
I think the image that we paint for people is not always what we're truly struggling with, right? And
Yeah.
I think even to this day you can kind of relate to that. I will say, yeah, you're right. You know, when you came over, you know, we had parties, we had things, but that's probably where every ounce of, you know, extra cash went. It didn't go to savings, it didn't go to investments, it didn't go to anything. It went to maintaining, at least at the time, our mental health, right? Because you know, you imagine every day you're looking at those finances, and I'm the kind of guy that looks at every penny, and you know, I've learned some very hard lessons from that. But you know, friends and having people over were kind of my outlet at the time, and you know, what was I going to do? Break down every time someone came over? No, I mean, we made the most of it, but that's why. But you know, you got to realize that's why we were at home with the land and everything. But you know, if you think about where we came from growing up, you know, with our parents, and I know where you came from and where I came from. We grew up in the same area. We didn't have much, so the little bit that I had back then, it just seemed, you know, like wow. Right. And so, you know, the way we see it is just because of our background. And, you know, but if I look back, man, if I look back, I'm like, I was broke. But back then I felt sometimes I felt like, look at me, I'm on top of the world. Right. And so it's a different perspective. It just depends on where you're looking from.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit more about my story in the next episode, but I've got this image of you and how you're spending your money and how you're living your life. Like, this is the Honest Playbook. Looking back at Jason in his 20s around that time, like, be honest about what you saw me doing and what you thought in that time about how I was spending my money and what I was doing.
Sure. Well, I hope I don't break our friendship up. It's been 30 years, almost 30 years now. All right. So let me tell you that, we're going to get harsh here. Grab the Kleenex. No, you know what? I think back then I had an ego. Right. And I think it was the positive feedback from many folks, not just yourself. Right. I hear you sometimes, and you've kind of alluded to this in the past. I don't think we've ever gotten to the nitty gritty like we're doing right now, which is great because it's good conversation. I don't think you've heard a lot of this.
Yeah.
You know, we talk a lot, but I don't think we get into full details sometimes. But I remember watching you, and you chose your broke. If we kind of circle back here.
Sure did.
I from what I remember,
sure did.
You partied. Mm-hmm. You partied. You drank.
Yeah.
You went out on a lot of dates. You know, I remember you working. I remember you were really not. You had no assets. You were buying clothes. You were buying drinks and parties and going out. And I think the work environment you had at the time. I think you were being a waiter at the time, if I recall.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to you all the time. And I will say I was probably envious at the time, to be completely honest with you. Sometimes you would be like, hey, you know, we went out last night and I went with this girl and this and this and that. And, you know, and I think, you know, 20s me was like,
right.
You know, I'm sitting at home, not married, but, you know, kind of living the homebody life sometimes.
Right.
And, you were out partying, having a good time. And so you got to remember, from my perspective, you may have seen me and said, well, he's got a home, he's got his shit straight, and felt some kind of way. But sometimes I looked at you and was like, look at this guy. He's got no problems, no responsibilities. He's got all these girls he's going out with. He's drinking every night. He's having a great time. He's telling me all these things. And you got to remember, coming from a guy with a home and was house broke, yeah, that looked a lot more appealing, but you know, at the moment it did.
Isn't it interesting? Because I've never heard you say that, and I think back and I can see you were my friend and you were pretty straightforward with a lot of things sometimes.
Too
and
straightforward.
Huh?
I said probably too straightforward. I have a bad habit.
No, I mean like you were right in the things that you said. Like, I knew you were concerned about me, and it's like, man, you got to chill out, bro. Like, and I always felt like even our friendship was sometimes it suffered because of some. It's like you might have looked at him and been like, oh, he's having a good time. But in the same sense, I was making some stupid decisions, right? Like, I was doing some dumb shit. I knew that you were concerned about that. But I also, at that point in time, like, I didn't know what to do different. I didn't know how to change, you know? So there was So yeah, I'm like having this good time, but then also silently suffering in my own kind of way, right? Like maybe I was monetarily broke and even probably like happiness broke. It was all a front, you know.
Sure. Sure.
It was all a dream is what I think about, but yeah, it's just it'll be interesting. So yeah, when I talk a little bit more about my story, I'll talk about the decisions that I made and probably why I made those decisions and how they were dumb looking back and that kind of thing. But what do you have anything else to say about that?
I will say, just to kind of touch on the friendship piece, I think there was rough times. I'm glad that we're still here 30 years later, because we've been friends for a very long time. You're probably my oldest friend, if you didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there was times I gave you advice, and I remember there'd be some distance between us. I remember, I wouldn't hear from you for a while, and we'd have some rocky times, and I think we had some rough patches, and and sometimes, yeah, you're right. I may have, one thing I've learned is the way you say something isn't how it's heard, right? Just because I say it doesn't mean it's heard in the way I said it. And I've learned that the hard way. And that's probably episode 20 down the road here.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my
so go
God.
ahead and stick in if you're listening
Stick
to this.
around. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I say a lot of things, and I am brutally honest at times, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. And I will say that my intentions are always good with you, as they are with most people. Anytime, if I take the time, in my opinion, if I take the time to give you advice, it's because I care. When I don't care, you ain't gonna hear the damn thing from me. I will watch you act a fool and smile. And when I care, I do say, unfortunately, the brutal truth. And I think that there was times I remember one time I bitched at you. I remember one time I bitched at you, and we'll get into this. I won't get into the details, but I remember I bitched at you, and then I felt so horrible later because I was like, he didn't deserve that. But I bitched at you because I was like, Jason, you're better than this. In my head, it was like, the words were, Jason, you're better than this. Jason, I know you, man. Because I always believed you're smarter than I was, and you were full of potential. And at that time, I always felt like you should be doing better than me. And I always believed that to this day. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's up here. What came out is probably, it was probably like, you suck, Jason, you suck.
Yeah.
But in my head, it was, you sucked not because you suck. You sucked because I see you in a way that you weren't living up to. And that's where I was like, you're failing yourself. And it's easier said than done, especially when we're 30 years later or 20 some years later. But that's how I always felt about you. I just think you at the time I just wanted you to do things, and I definitely didn't know how to communicate. I probably still don't know how to communicate.
Yeah. No, I think you're a lot better at it now. And hearing you talk about that now, it means a lot. And in your 20s, you're not hearing that. It's like you're doing what you're doing because either you think it's the right thing or it's not the right thing, but you can't stop and you don't know why, or whatever it is. Like you choose, you make your decisions and you've got to live with them and that kind of thing. But looking back, it's like I don't know that I believe that about myself. So and I think that's an issue that people have, is you're saying, it's like, you're smarter than me. You've got potential. You've got all this. You can do better. And I think at that point in time, I didn't feel smart or wise or like I could do better. I felt like I was stuck. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, excuse me. I just think it's hard to hear that kind of stuff when you're younger and you're just doing what you do. And again, ego, like you think you think you're fine. You think you're good. No one can convince you otherwise. That's a really good looking back scenario, like what we thought we knew then versus what we know now. I think that's going to be a major theme in our podcast, The Honest Playbook. But you have anything else to say about decisions in your 20s, finances in your 20s? Like looking back, is there something that sticks out to you that actually the question I want to ask you was, with what you know now, looking back, what would you say to 23-year-old Jose as he's sitting in that room about to sign those papers? That's what I want to hear.
I wouldn't say anything to him.
Okay.
You know why? I'll dive into that real quick so you can.
Yeah.
Everybody always says, "What would you go back and say to yourself?" And everybody always has an answer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And just honestly, this is the first time anyone's ever asked me, "What would you tell yourself?" Nothing. Because if I told myself what I wanted to tell myself, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now.
Sure. Yeah.
And just because nothing I have today, or everything I have today actually, is because I did sign those papers and because I did go through that struggle.
Right.
And I did have to, I dug myself a hole, but I also got myself out of that hole. And I think there's times where, you know, people have to be honest with themselves and say the struggles you go through are going to rebuild you. And you know what? And every struggle I've had has rebuilt me. I mean, because I've, as you know, I've been divorced. I've gone through things and still go through things. And sometimes when you're in the middle of those holes, it doesn't look good. But you know, something will come out of it. And I think the home in my 20s was a lesson.
Yeah.
You know, I've probably have bought 5-6 homes since then.
Right.
For investment purposes, for, you know, personal primary residence. So yeah, I fucked that one up. Yeah. I really messed that one up, but you know what? I don't want to change my life, man. I try not to live in regret. Easier said than done, because trust me, you know, but I can't keep going back. So, you know what? I want 23-year-old me to go back to just keep doing what he's doing, because it's going to help him become, you know, 44-year-old me. So
yeah. I've heard people say, like, you can, if you look too long at the past, you'll get depressed. If you look too long at the future, you'll become anxious. But if you can be present in the moment, you can be happy. And so it's like, you can look back and be like, you could be like, oh man, I regret that decision. Oh, that was stupid. And it's like, you can why beat yourself up now for something you did 21 years ago? You know, like, that's so. Yeah. The question we'll always ask on the show is like, so what really matters based on the decisions that you made, whether they were good or bad back then, and what you know now, like what really matters. And I think you hit the nail on the head, but maybe leave that as some advice for somebody who's listening here today. Like, you said something about every hardship that you went through, it taught you a lesson to help you grow more. Like, just kind of solidify that for us. Sure.
I mean, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're going through struggles or you've made some bad decisions, just wait, right? Just like anytime you're successful, it will come to an end. And anytime you fail, it will come to an end. Just give it enough time. So when you're on top, enjoy it, live in the moment, and appreciate the work you've done, which is one thing I still struggle to this day. And when you're at the bottom and you're trying to lift yourself up, just understand that one day you won't be there again. And I think you can make it through. So don't regret everything. Just keep going. Learn from what you did, and learning your success, but also learning your failures.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. I think this has been a really great episode for people who are listening, but also for me. Like, I'm like, hey, let's do a podcast. I want to talk about finances. I want to talk about life. And it's because I want to have conversations, but you know, I guess I didn't realize that I would be so, I guess, blessed and affected, I guess, by this episode. So there's more to come. This is just the beginning. And, we'll dive into more topics like this. And there's so much. There's family, there's relationships. You know, you talked about divorce. I mean, relationships are a big deal. Home ownership, finances, investments. Like, there's so many things that I think this episode can really give us something to look forward to here later on down the road. So you said episode 20. So I should be promoting just episode 2, but you're like, we'll get into the episode 20.
Well,
so
yeah, we'll get into that.
Stick around, because
Now, definitely stick around to see if our friendship lasts this podcast. We're gonna be sharing so much that I don't think we've ever talked about, which keeps this interesting. So stick around.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you guys so much for joining us for episode 1 of the Honest Playbook, and then definitely come check us out this next episode where it'll be part 2 of mistakes in our 20s, and we'll dive into some of the foolish but necessary decisions that I made when I was in my 20s.